Hi there, my friends. Welcome back to the Salt Circle, where we hold space for sacred self inquiry, deep psychological integration, and the reclamation of truth beyond survival. So, this conversation today asks a painful but necessary question. And this episode of the Salt Circle Summer series is really about confronting our own inner enabler. So, one of these really necessary questions are, what happens after we've got no contact with these toxic systems? Find the same exact patterns still living within us. When we leave the abusive home, the dysfunctional marriage, the narcissistic church, the invalidating culture, why do we often still sabotage our own healing, betray our boundaries, or attract familiar pain? So, this is the work of confronting that inner enabler, the internalized aspect of the system that hurt us. The voice that tells us to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to make excuses, to overextend, to not make things awkward, right? This part is not the enemy, but it is a fragment of our once adaptive self, a protective mechanism formed under duress. But it is a voice we must now compassionately dismantle because it no longer serves our becoming. So, this is a really, deep, comprehensive dive into the practical steps of interrupting the unconscious generational patterns we carry forward so that we do not become the next echo of dysfunction in someone else's life, or even most importantly, in our own life. So let's begin by defining what an inner enabler is. In this context, the inner enabler refers to the internalized psychological patterns, often unconscious, that encourage or permit harmful behaviors to continue, either in ourselves or in others. These patterns are not a sign of moral or personal failure. They are often adaptive responses to environments where self-sacrifice, silence, or placation were literally the only ways to survive. So, in Jungian terms, this part of the psyche often hides in the shadow realm of all the traits, drives, instincts, and truths we repress because they were once deemed unacceptable or dangerous in our early environments. But unlike the more overt, dark aspects of our shadow, the inner enabler often disguises itself as morality, empathy, loyalty, or I'm just being a good person. It's the part of you that says, oh, they didn't mean it that way. It's not actually that bad. I can handle it. I don't want to make a big deal out of this. Maybe it is my fault. Why am I always like this? This voice feels noble, mature, even spiritual. But in truth, the psychic residue of dysfunction. It is a form of internalized gaslighting shaped by trauma, fear, and shame. The inner enabler is not your true self. It is your adaptive self, the version of you who learned that love was conditional, that truth was dangerous, that boundaries were punishable, and that your worth was tied into your ability to endure. So, to dismantle the inner enabler, we really got to understand what built it. So, according to, attachment theory, Children develop internal working models of relationships based on early caregiving. If the child's caregivers are unpredictable, emotionally immature, or abusive, the child may develop an anxious or disorganized attachment style, which is seeking safety by appeasing, caretaking, or preemptively regulating the emotions of others. This becomes the foundation of enabling, a desperate attempt to earn security through erasing yourself. The fawning response is something that psychologists identify as one of the four primary trauma responses. There's fight or flight, which we all hear of. There's also freeze or fawn. Fawning is the compulsion to appease, accommodate, please others to avoid any kind of conflict or harm. So in adulthood, this becomes a deeply ingrained behavioral pattern that can feel like empathy, but it's often self-abandonment. And a lot of times, in a lot of psychological theories and concepts, even in Jungian psychology, Jung spoke of the wounded healer, one who is drawn to fix others as a way of avoiding their own pain. The inner enabler often lives here, masquerading as compassion while avoiding confrontation. We help others avoid discomfort because we are terrified of our own. And really, to emphasize that family patterns also, the generational transmission of trauma, which is to understand that family patterns are passed down through emotional systems across generations. Dysfunction is not just personal, it is ancestral. Enabling often runs in the family. The mother who makes excuses for the abusive father, older sibling who hides the neglect, the adult child who pays bills for an addicted parent. These behaviors become normalized, and without awareness, they will replicate. And then there comes this moment of recognition, waking up to the inner enabler is often a moment of existential confrontation. It is the realization that even though we left the toxic person or environment, we still don't actually really say what we feel. We still put others first. We still feel responsible for everyone else's emotions. We will dismiss our intuition because we just want someone else to be comfortable. And then this is a moment of grief, guilt, and for myself, rage. You might ask, why do I keep breaking the same promise to myself? Why didn't I see this earlier? How come I let this pattern happen even though I saw what was happening? Am I just like them? Am I complicit? And let me be amply clear that awareness is not condemnation. It is liberation. You are not bad. You are not beyond repair. You're just waking up. But recognition is not enough. You got to really interrupt the pattern. You have to dismantle the inner enabler. So this is, where shadow work meets practical psychology. So, this is really where the real work begins, and it's messy and it's hard, and a lot of times it's so exhausting, but whatever. We got to do it. So the first step is really, a radical self-awareness. Begin to track in real time when you minimize your needs, when you over accommodate, when you silence your truth. Use somatic cues when your throat tightens, you start to clench your jaw, you feel incredibly unexplainably tired. Notice when you're slipping into old patterns. And journaling really does help it gives you a point to look back on. You can see how many times this occurs, how many days, you know? And so does naming part, this is my inner appeaser. This is part of me that is stuck in survival mode. This is a pattern I really don't want to have. And then just be like, hey, I see you. I see it. So then step two of reclaiming this disowned shadow, the antidote to enabling is not aggression. It is integration. Part of you that says no, feels rage, that holds boundaries. This is the part we repressed because it once caused rupture, right? So now you got to see it as your sacred ally. This is the process of shadow integration, bringing what was unconscious into conscious awareness so it can become a choice and not a compulsion. You can ask yourself things like, what am I afraid to express? Why do I think this quality is bad or wrong or selfish? What memory is it tied to where I felt shame for feeling this way? What would it mean to honor my anger, my limits, my grief? And that's, to move on to step three, all that is reparenting this core wound. Often the inner enabler is a younger self that is wanting to be chosen, it's wanting to be valued. And you must choose them now. You choose them now. Through inner child work, you can begin to offer compassion, safety, attunement that you once had to earn through enabling others. So, speak out loud to yourself. Just be like, I don't have to keep anyone else safe. I'm safe. Say these things out loud, really give a name to it, put some stank on it, verbally. And set and hold boundaries in small doses. And boundaries really are the practical edge of shadow work. And it's okay to start small. You could say, like, I need some time to think about that. Or just say no without apology or explaining. Delay the impulse to give disclaimers or explanations. You will feel uncomfortable. And that's what's growing, You are rewiring your nervous system to understand that safety is not found in overgiving. It's found in integrity, in your own confidence, the validation you give yourself. And, this work is really tender and often, dysregulating. So to find spaces where your boundaries are respected and not resented is especially important. So, support groups, therapy, friendships that are rooted in honesty and mutuality can really help you practice being seen without enabling and loving yourself without having to erase yourself. And you know what? Like, this work really is not only for us, it's also for those who came before us. You really have to stop the generational pattern. And stopping the pattern means becoming aware of how we recreate, enable, or ignore dysfunction in our parenting, in our partnerships, communities, and selves. It means refusing to participate in the gaslighting of others. It means honoring truth even when it costs us our comfort. And it means letting the wound end with us. But let me say this very, 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 very clearly. You are not responsible for the harm you have inherited, but you are responsible for the harm you replicate. And once you have become aware, there really is no turning back. And that's almost the sacred burden and the sacred gift of being the cycle breaker. Dismantling the inner enabler is not a one-time act. It's not just going to happen once. It is a lifelong practice. a return of remembrance. It's a daily choice to live in alignment with your own nucleus, your own center, your own values, and not someone else's comfort. And, if this brings some shit up for you, because I know it brings things up for me, also breathe. Don't forget to breathe. This work is not about shame. It's not about making you emotionally volatile. It's all about liberation. And we all carry echoes of dysfunction, but we also carry the power to transmute them. You are not broken. You are remembering. You are not selfish. You are sovereign. You are not cruel. You are becoming free. So thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of the Salt Circles Summer Series. I can't wait to see you next week. And until then, may your no be sacred, your boundaries holy, and your healing irreversible.